It's been a while since we dared to drift into the vast unknown, where the water runs deep and the mysteries run deeper. Whether you're drawn to the sea or just fascinated by what hides beneath its surface, tonight is for you. Welcome back to Uncharted Echoes. I'm your host, guiding you through tales that lurk beneath the waves and beyond the edge of understanding. In this episode, we'll plunge into stories of the ocean's darkest corners, where fear takes the shape of crashing waves and silent depths. If the idea of the unknown makes your heart race, you're in the right place. Get comfortable, keep your ears open, and maybe leave a light on, just in case. Let's begin. Story 1. Cliffside View. Listen, I know how it sounds, like I'm just another kid exaggerating a childhood memory, but this one has stayed with me years later, more vivid than most dreams and heavier than any story I ever wanted to carry. When I was younger, my grandparents owned a cottage on the coast of Maine, not the charming postcard kind with lighthouses and lobster rolls. No, theirs was perched right at the edge of a jagged cliff that seemed to drop into the cold, endless Atlantic. The air always smelled of salt and old wood, and the wind had a way of whispering things you couldn't quite make out. Every summer, my mum would drop me off there for a few weeks. She said the ocean air would be good for me. That time away from the city would help reset my nerves, whatever that meant. She never seemed to notice how pale I'd go the second we neared the cottage. I hated it, always did. The place was too quiet, too far from anything or anyone familiar, and my bedroom, if you could call it that, was a little corner space with one narrow window that faced the sea. No curtains thick enough to keep out the view. I'd lie in bed at night, staring out into what others might call scenic or picturesque, but to me it was a wall of grey, jagged rocks, restless waves, and that dizzying height that made my stomach knot. Yes, I've got a fear of heights, always have, and the thought of sleeping just feet from the edge of a sheer cliff was its own kind of hell. The first night, I barely slept. The bed smelled like salt and mothballs, and the sheets were rough, like they'd been air-dried in the wind for decades. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I felt something, like someone was watching me from the other side of the glass. At one point, heart pounding, I forced myself to look. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows across the rocks, and the sea shimmered like it was holding secrets. But there was no figure, nothing moved. Still, I felt like I wasn't alone. Eventually, I drifted off, but my dreams weren't much better. I kept imagining myself slipping from the cliff, falling into cold, foamy water, the kind that churns and claws at you like it wants to keep you. I woke up gasping, my hands gripping the thin sheets like lifelines. That morning, Grandma made blueberry pancakes, and Grandpa was out in the shed fussing with his old fishing gear, whistling like life was perfectly normal. I tried to play it cool. I mean, they'd lived here forever. They loved the place, so maybe it was just me, a city kid overreacting. I didn't mention the nightmares. I helped Grandma dry dishes and followed Grandpa around his little garden, trying to enjoy the quiet. But the feeling never left. That evening, the breeze coming in from the ocean turned colder. It rattled the loose window panes and made the walls creak. I caught sight of the cliffs again just before sunset, a fiery orange glow painting the rocks, turning the sea into molten steel. Beautiful, sure, but it made my skin crawl. I went to bed early, determined to fall asleep before my mind could wander, but the second night was worse. Around midnight, the wind howled louder than before. It clawed at the walls and roof like it wanted in. I lay stiff under the covers, listening, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Scraping, slow, dragging along stone. It didn't sound like anyone walking inside the house. It was outside, below the window, near the cliff's edge. My breath hitched. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed not to, but around 3 a.m., trembling and soaked in sweat, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat up and crept to the window, hoping, praying, I wouldn't see a pale face pressed against the glass. I didn't. There was only the sea again, still and dark and bottomless. But the feeling lingered, like I was being watched, like something out there knew I was there. Anytime I managed to close my eyes, I'd see it again, something crawling up the cliff, human-shaped but not human, pale, bloated, soaked like a drowned thing coming home. By dawn, I was drained. The weak morning light painted the room in soft pink and gold, and I finally stirred from a half-conscious state. The room was quiet, but that same pressure sat heavy on my chest, that prickling awareness you get when someone's watching you. My grandparents weren't awake yet. I lay still, trying to shake it off, but I couldn't. So I told myself enough was enough. I couldn't keep living like I was in a horror movie. My grandparents had been in that cottage for years, decades. They weren't scared. So I got up. I approached the window, slow and crouched, as if not wanting to startle whatever might be out there. The tide was low now, revealing more of the rocky base. The seaweed looked slick and black, like ropes tangled among the sharp ridges. I scanned the coastline, left to right, back again. Then I saw him. At first I thought it was a washed-up body, a pale shape hunched at the base of the cliff close to the surf, but it moved. Not much, just enough to prove it was alive. It was a man, or something like one. He sat curled forward, spine arched, limbs impossibly long and thin. His skin looked pruned and raw, like he'd been soaking in the ocean for days. He was completely naked, and yet there was nothing vulnerable about him. He looked ancient, wrong. He stared out at the sea like he belonged to it. I froze. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My mind went blank trying to figure out what I was looking at. A drifter, a sick man, some lost fisherman. But then he turned. Even from that distance, I knew he saw me. His head twisted slowly, too slowly, and his face tilted upward until our eyes met. And then he smiled. A wide, chilling grin that wasn't joyful. It was knowing, mocking, like he'd been waiting for someone to see him. And I had. I couldn't move. Then, without breaking eye contact, he leaned forward and slipped into the water. No splash, no ripple, just gone. Like the ocean swallowed him on cue. I staggered back from the window, legs shaking. I collapsed onto the bed, heart thudding like it was trying to escape my chest. Should I tell someone? Should I go outside? But I couldn't. I couldn't even bring myself to look again. Minutes passed, maybe more. Eventually I heard footsteps in the hallway. Grandpa, awake and shuffling to the kitchen to make coffee. The sound was a relief, like a rope pulling me out of deep water. I grabbed clothes and followed, pretending I'd just woken up. He greeted me with a smile, asked if I wanted oatmeal or eggs. I mumbled something, still glancing at the window above the kitchen sink. From there, the cliffs looked normal, peaceful even. To this day, I still try to convince myself it was just a dream, a sleep-deprived hallucination from a kid scared of heights and the sea. But I know what I saw, and whatever it was, it knew I saw it too. Story 2. There's something down there. I want to remain as anonymous as possible. What I'm about to share violates more than one non-disclosure agreement, and even hinting at some of the things we encountered could put me at risk. Still, the weight of it has grown too heavy. People deserve to know that the deep ocean, those cold, black places we call trenches, hold more than we understand. I've served as an oceanographic researcher with a multinational deep-sea expedition team. For over a decade, I've worked aboard research vessels equipped with remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, and specialized submersibles, machines built to withstand the unimaginable pressures of the ocean's most extreme depths. Our work took us across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, mapping vast regions of the Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, and the Kermadec Trench. We catalogued new species of amphipods and siphonophores, charted hydrothermal vent fields, and collected crucial data on deep-sea geology and plate tectonics. But nothing, not years of training, not rigorous simulations, not all the science I believed in, prepared me for what we encountered in the summer of 2021. That year, our team launched a 3-month mission focused on the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point in Earth's oceans. This was not our first time there, but this expedition had a different energy, more secretive, better funded, with specialized equipment I'd never used before. We had a state-of-the-art submersible custom-built to survive depths exceeding 36,000 feet. On board were advanced sensors designed to capture water and sediment samples in zones no human had ever directly observed. I was one of 3 aboard the submersible for our 3rd dive into Challenger Deep. Hannah, our pilot, myself as co-pilot and systems engineer, and Dr. Chin, our lead marine biologist. These are aliases, of course. Our dives often lasted up to 12 hours. Inside that titanium sphere, we monitored hull integrity, oxygen levels, heat management, and dozens of other variables with obsessive precision. Every descent felt like slipping into a forgotten world, sunless, silent, and alien. As we sank below 30,000 feet, the light from the surface disappeared completely. Only the sub's external beams cut through the darkness. On this particular dive, our target was a narrow sub-trench mapped only once before by sonar. Coordinates suggested a steep slope descending into what some of our team speculated could be an unmapped depression, possibly deeper than Challenger Deep's known floor. The area was barren at first, grey, fine sediment, scattered rock formations, and the occasional drifting invertebrate. I remember seeing a gelatinous shape pass our viewport, trailing faint bioluminescence, but nothing remarkable at the time. Then we reached the drop-off. The slope angled into a canyon, sharply carved as if gouged out of the Earth's crust. As we hovered at its entrance, I felt it, that strange, primal unease that tells you something is wrong, even when nothing is obviously out of place. Chin noted something immediately. The canyon was unnaturally silent. No snailfish, no amphipods, no visible life at all. That was a red flag. Even at extreme depths, some form of life usually flickers by. Tiny crustaceans, deep-sea jellyfish, worms. But here, nothing. We inched forward. Our sonar picked up faint readings within the canyon, dense clusters of something, but the reflections were inconsistent. The sub's manipulator arms were extended, ready to collect samples. Then, as our floodlights swept the canyon floor, the scene changed. It was a graveyard. Bones and fragments littered the seabed, broken exoskeletons, fish skulls, shredded carapaces. Some were familiar, others were not. Some belonged to known deep-sea creatures, others were. Their structure didn't match anything in our database. My stomach knotted. Something had been feeding here. That's when Hannah pointed it out. Movement. The sonar lit up with a large return signal, shifting slowly behind a nearby rock formation, 10 feet in length, maybe more. Not a false echo. It moved with deliberate pulses, not the chaotic drift of a dead object in the current. We turned our external cameras toward the source. At first, all we saw was swirling sediment. Then, something like eyes, twin, pale reflections, caught the light. They blinked out. Dr. Chin muttered a guess. Perhaps a sleeper shark, or a large eel, but it didn't move like either. The shadow shifted again, deeper into the canyon. We followed. Part of me screamed against it. Logic told me we were protected by 6 inches of titanium alloy, yet instinctively I felt exposed, watched. We reached the rock formation and swept our lights around. The creature was gone, but there, in the sediment, was a groove. No, a trench. Something had dragged itself or something else along the canyon floor. It was fresh. We proceeded at a crawl. The trench in the sediment twisted around boulders and disappeared around a ridge. That's when the submersible jolted sharply. Lights flickered. Warning alarms blared. Hull contact, minor impact, starboard side. Something had tapped us. I froze. Hannah steadied the controls while Dr. Chin pulled up external camera feeds. Nothing. Just drifting silt. Then came a noise. A faint scraping sound. Metallic, rhythmic, like claws or teeth dragging across the sub's hull. We spun the sub slowly, floodlights probing the black. Then we saw it. A shape darted past the stern camera. Long and sinuous, eel-like but thicker, its body glimmered under the light with translucent armor-like plates. It moved fast, far too fast for a creature adapted to such crushing depths. "Did you see that?" Hannah whispered. We all had. Then came a louder scraping, this time from above. I angled the camera upward. There, clinging to the sub's top surface, was a creature. Huge, unlike anything documented in marine biology. It was part serpent, part crustacean, with a segmented body and an array of shimmering plates along its back. Its mouth was circular, like a lamprey's, ringed with spines, gnawing at the metal. The eyes, if they were eyes, were pale and bulging, and they stared directly into the nearest camera lens. It was trying to bite through the hull. I've never felt fear like that before or since. Hannah activated the thrusters. The sub lurched forward, displacing clouds of sediment. The creature lost its grip, recoiling backward. It hung for a second, twisting mid-water, revealing a nightmarish ring of jagged teeth. Then it vanished, streaking into the black. We didn't wait to see if it would return. Dr. Chin and Hannah agreed it was time to ascend. We rose steadily. That's when it struck again. The manipulator arm jerked violently. The same creature, or another one like it, had latched onto it. We saw sparks, actual sparks, fly as its jaws tore into the machinery. Dr. Chin attempted to retract the arm, but it jammed. An alarm screamed in our ears. Hannah hit the forward thrusters. The sub surged upward, and with a horrible tearing noise, the arm was ripped away. The creature disappeared with it. Then sonar lit up again, multiple large contacts behind us. More of them. We didn't have time to count. We deployed a high-frequency acoustic deterrent as a last resort. The signals may have worked. The sonar contacts faded as we sped into open trench waters. We broke the surface over an hour later. The crew of our support vessel Calypso helped us aboard. The submersible's arm was gone. The hull bore gashes where something had tried to chew through it. Everyone was silent. The expedition ended early. Back at port, we were made to sign extended NDAs. No reports were released publicly. The damaged footage, I heard, was classified. But I still see it. In dreams, in flashes, in the silence of deep water. There's something down there. More than one. And they are not blind scavengers or passive filter feeders. They watch, they follow, they learn. Do I think it's surprising? Not even slightly. The deep ocean covers more of our planet than land, and we've explored less than 5% of it. Darkness, pressure, and isolation create the perfect conditions for evolution to take strange paths. But what terrifies me most isn't what we saw. It's the thought that what we saw was just a juvenile, and it knew we were there. Story 3. The Moaning Fog by Joe Runness. Hello everyone, and thank you for giving my story a chance. I come from a small, weather-beaten fishing village tucked along the northern coast of Norway, in the county formerly known as Troms og Finnmark. It's a rugged place, sharp cliffs, freezing winds, and a sea that's both giver and taker. The winters stretch on for what feels like eternity, swallowing the sun for weeks, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to see the aurora borealis dance across the sky in silent ribbons of green and purple. Those moments can make even the harshest night feel magical. I grew up on those icy shores, the son of a quiet fisherman who believed in respecting both the sea and the things that lived in it. My father and I would spend our summers fishing for cod and pollock, rising before dawn to launch our modest wooden boat into the fjords. We'd wrap ourselves in layers of wool, oilskin coats and old knitted hats, the kind only grandmothers could make. Most mornings it was just us, the gulls, and the endless grey-blue mirror of the sea. But not every fishing trip was peaceful. The Arctic is not kind to the careless. Sudden storms could rise from stillness. Fog would roll in like a curtain drawn across the world, and you had to trust your compass, your experience, and your gut. One summer, in August, when I was 17, I encountered something I've never been able to explain, something neither my father nor I ever fully spoke of again. It started like any other morning. We had left the dock around 4:30 a.m., just as the horizon turned from black to a steel-grey sheen. The sky was clear, the water unnervingly still. That kind of stillness never lasts. We'd gone farther out than usual, chasing rumours of larger cod swarms near the mouth of the fjord. My father knew the channels like the lines in his weathered palms, so I didn't worry. I was half asleep, watching the water ripple behind us when I first noticed the fog. It was subtle at first, thin, almost elegant tendrils that twisted around the boat like smoke from an unseen fire. As the sun crept higher, the fog thickened, condensing into a solid, damp wall that swallowed the world whole. The shoreline vanished in minutes. The birds went quiet. The usual sea sounds, waves lapping the hull, the distant caw of gulls, faded until all we could hear was the purring of our engine and the quiet creak of the boat's frame. My father squinted into the white void, muttering under his breath. "Hold steady," he told me. "We'll drift until it lifts. No use moving blind." But the fog didn't lift. Instead, it deepened and brought with it a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, a strange, low moan that echoed faintly across the water, like a distant animal in pain. But the air was still. There was no wind, no movement, and the sound, it wasn't natural. It had rhythm. It rose and fell in haunting tones, like a voice singing a lament just beyond our reach. My skin prickled, and my father's brow furrowed. He didn't scare easily, but something about that sound unsettled him. I could tell by the way he clutched the tiller, knuckles white, jaw tight. We tried shouting into the mist, thinking maybe someone was lost nearby, but our voices felt dampened, swallowed by the fog like sound had no place in it. The moaning only continued, closer now, louder, deeper. It didn't feel like it was around us. It felt like it was in the fog, part of it. Shapes began to appear. At first I assumed they were seabirds or floating kelp, but some were too tall, too still. Once, I thought I saw something standing upright, like driftwood, spindly and unnatural, but when I looked again, it was gone. My father was sweating despite the cold. He said nothing, just stared into the whiteness like he was trying to make out a face. Then the compass began to spin, not just slightly off, completely, wildly spinning in circles. My father tapped it, smacked it, cursed under his breath. "Magnetics," he muttered. "Something's wrong." The fish finder went berserk too, just static lines and garbled noise. The radio crackled, not with silence or static, but with fragments of voices, unintelligible and broken, like someone speaking backwards underwater. That's when we struck something. It was a hard jolt, like scraping against a submerged rock or wreckage. My father killed the engine immediately, and we drifted, both of us frozen. He leaned over the side of the boat, pulling me back instinctively. In the stillness, I peered into the water and saw debris, rotting wood, seaweed, bits of metal, the remains of something old, something sunken. The water stank of salt and decay. Then I saw something else, a pale, ghastly face beneath the surface. Its eyes were open, wide with some eternal scream, mouth agape in a voiceless moan. I gasped and stumbled back. My father saw it too. I could tell by the way he jerked upright and ran to the engine. He didn't speak, just started the motor and pushed us ahead at full speed. The moaning swelled into a chorus. Voices now, chanting in long, broken tones. Some syllables sounded human, others did not. The fog seemed to chase us. We couldn't see 10 feet ahead, but we pushed forward, praying we wouldn't hit anything else. Then something heavy splashed into the water near the stern. I turned and saw a long, shadowy form slipping beneath the surface, vaguely human in shape, but elongated and wrong. The water distorted it, or maybe it was just never right to begin with. Suddenly silence. The moaning ceased. Just like that. A vacuum of sound followed, deafening in its own way. Even the boat's engine seemed muffled. Then the fog began to thin, slowly unraveling like someone lifting a veil from our eyes. The coastline appeared ahead of us, jagged rocks and mossy cliffs, far from where we'd started. We didn't speak, not then, not for the rest of the trip home. The compass never worked again. My father tossed it into a drawer and never replaced it. We still went fishing, but never that far out, and never in heavy fog. In fact, we'd head home the moment the mist rolled in. Years have passed since that day, and I still wonder what we encountered. A strange atmospheric event, a wrecked ship's ghosts, some ancient, hungry thing from the deep. I don't know. All I know is the sea doesn't always give answers. Sometimes it just gives warnings. And I pray that was all it was. Story 4. Drifting with the Devils, by an anonymous former French Navy officer. I've served in the Navy for several years, patrolling waters from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. The stories we carry with us are often confined to the quiet corners of our minds, never shared. But after all this time, I think it's time I told you about something that still haunts me to this day. A mission that, no matter how many years pass, still feels like a nightmarish fever dream. It started during a routine patrol. We were a small crew, but experienced. We had handled distress calls from all over, from merchant ships to private yachts. But this one was different from the very start. It came in the form of a vague distress call from a small cargo ship that was flagged under the Comoros. The message was garbled, hard to understand. Only fragments of information got through, something about a possible hull breach, some damage. There were no specific coordinates, no clear details about their location. It was just enough to make us wonder if this ship was truly in trouble, or worse, already gone. We set course, heading out into the darkness of the open sea, unsure of what we'd find. By the time we arrived, night had fallen completely. The ocean was a vast black expanse beneath a silvery moon. The wind carried the scent of salt, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the engine. Our radar didn't show anything unusual, not at first. There were no signs of distress, no emergency signals. We kept on searching for hours, scanning the water with all the technology we had, but there was nothing, just endless waves that broke against the hull with a rhythm we had come to know well. We were about to call off the search, chalking it up to a communication error or a false alarm, when something caught our lookout's eye. There were pieces of debris scattered across the water, smashed crates, empty barrels and twisted metal, but there was no ship, no wreckage, just bits and pieces of something. We couldn't make sense of it, but it didn't feel right. It felt like we were in a bad dream where things didn't add up, but we kept moving forward. We later learned that the cargo ship had somehow made it to port, a little worse for wear but safe. It was a relief, but the mystery remained. What had happened, and why had they sent that strange distress call? We stayed in the area for the next few days, determined to understand what had really transpired. This was still the time when we thought the ship might have been in trouble, or worse, sunk. But as we continued our patrol, something happened that I'll never forget. On the third night, while we were on watch, we picked up something faint on the radar, lights. Very faint, almost like a shadow in the dark. They appeared for a brief moment, flickering, then disappeared again. We all stared at the radar, hoping for more. Nothing. But the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something wasn't right. The captain ordered us to investigate, and we all rushed out on deck. The spotlights cut through the thick darkness, illuminating the water as we scanned the area. I'll never forget what they revealed. At first it looked like nothing, just the usual ripples of the ocean and the faint glow of the moon. But as we shined the lights further, we started to see movement beneath the surface, shapes. They weren't fish, at least not anything we had ever encountered. No, these were larger, and there was something disturbingly human-like about them. They were scaly, almost reptilian, with jagged fins that slithered through the water in fluid movements. And their faces were the stuff of nightmares. Human-like skulls, but with wide, hollow eyes and mouths full of needle-like teeth. At first, I thought they were some sort of bizarre deep-sea creature we had never catalogued before, but then I realized their movements were far too deliberate. They weren't like anything we had ever seen. As we stared in shock, something even more terrifying happened. These creatures, began to approach the ship. Some came so close to the surface that I could see the details of their twisted forms. I could hear the scratching noise as their claws dragged against the hull. The sound was nauseating. It was a deep, rhythmic scraping, like something trying to carve into the metal. I could hear the crew members behind me, some of them nervous, muttering about what we were seeing. Some had already begun to panic. Others tried to make sense of it. A few of the guys, against the captain's orders, fired at the things in the water. They retreated quickly, slipping back into the black depths, disappearing into the inky dark like shadows in the night. For the next month, we patrolled that same sector. Every night we kept our eyes on the water, waiting for something to happen again, but those creatures never returned. We couldn't explain what we had seen, but we couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected to the damaged cargo ship somehow. Maybe it wasn't a simple hull breach. Maybe the creatures had attacked the ship, their weaker hull and cheap build easily vulnerable to such an assault. Had those things been responsible for the damage, causing the crew to panic and send out that distress signal? The more I thought about it, the more questions arose. Were they always there? Had they been lurking beneath the surface all along, waiting for the right moment to surface? Or had we disturbed them somehow, stirred them from the depths? We didn't know, and we never got an answer. But there's one thing I do know. What we encountered that night was not something any of us should have ever come across, and it's something I will never forget. Those things, they were something else, something beyond what we could understand. And if anyone asks, I'll tell them, we drifted with the devils that night. We just never expected them to be real. Story 5. Night of the Lanternfish from Baja, by an anonymous fisherman. It was a hot summer when I was 21, and I found myself living in a small fishing village along the Baja California Peninsula, Mexico. The village was quiet, tucked away from the world, with nothing but the sound of the waves crashing against the rocky shore. My father, a lifelong fisherman, had decided to take me out for an overnight fishing run near Isla Espiritu Santo, a small island known for its rich waters teeming with marine life. We'd been out on these late-night trips before, but this one would stick with me forever. Our plan was simple. We were going to use lights to attract squid, then hope for dorado, mahi-mahi, at dawn. We'd done it 100 times, but this night was different. Something in the air felt off. The sea was darker than usual, and the only light came from our boat, which seemed too small in the vast expanse of the ocean. By midnight, we were about a dozen nautical miles from shore. The water was calm, the sky stretched out above us like a blanket of stars. We had rigged up some overhead lights, creating a bright halo over the water that was meant to attract squid. The water had a strange greenish hue that night, and there was an abundance of plankton and small fish swimming just below the surface. My father and I sat there, sipping coffee in the cold night air, just talking quietly. We had spent countless hours together on these fishing runs, but tonight was different. It was then that we saw them, thousands of tiny bobbing lights in the distance, scattered across the surface of the water. At first, I thought they were just plankton. Some species of plankton actually glow in the dark, so I thought it was nothing out of the ordinary. But these lights, these were different. They weren't scattered randomly, they were organized. They moved in lines, clusters, like a swarm or a school of fish, but not quite. My curiosity piqued, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Shut off the lights," my father said quietly, his voice thick with the same mix of curiosity and unease that I felt. We turned off the overhead lights, hoping to get a clearer view. As the boat drifted closer, the water around us lit up in a glowing, otherworldly green, revealing the source of the lights. The shapes were indistinct at first, but I soon realized they were much larger than plankton. Then the splashing started. At first it was faint, a small, quick break in the water, but soon it grew louder, more forceful. Something was breaching the surface, something large enough to make the boat shake. I hoped it was just dolphins. They often played in the wake of our boat, leaping and splashing in the moonlight. But no, these splashes were different. They were deeper, sharper, and the lights, those strange, organized lights, flickered and vanished beneath the water's surface, as though whatever they were had plunged back into the depths. I leaned over the side, shining a flashlight down into the water, trying to catch a better glimpse of whatever was down there, and that's when I saw it. My heart dropped into my stomach. A massive eye, about the size of a grapefruit, stared back at me from beneath the waves. It was pale, almost translucent, and seemed to glow with an eerie light of its own. The eye was part of a face, but it wasn't a fish's face. It wasn't human either. The features were distorted, warped, and unnerving. I stumbled back, trying to find my words, but before I could say anything, my father let out a loud scream. He was pointing frantically at the water, still staring down into the depths. I went to look again, but by the time I leaned over the edge, the face had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, sinking back into the darkness. That's when the real chaos began. A bigger splash rocked the boat this time, sending a wave of cold water over us. The boat shifted dangerously as the water around us began to churn violently, as if something massive was moving beneath us, circling the boat. I could hear something slithering, shifting under the water, rubbing against the hull. The boat creaked and groaned as if it might capsize at any moment. I was paralyzed with fear. There was something down there, something that could reach up and drag us into the depths. It wasn't just fish or dolphins. The water beneath us seemed alive, like it had turned into a living thing. My father, who had seen nearly everything there was to see on the ocean, was visibly shaken. I had never seen him like that before. In a moment of panic, he grabbed a flare from under the seat. Without saying a word, he lit it and tossed it into the water. The bright, red light illuminated the water for a brief second, and I could see the outlines of the creatures scattering away from the light, disappearing into the dark water as if they were afraid of it. We didn't waste any more time. My father quickly fired up the engine, and we raced away as fast as the boat would go, leaving the dark shapes behind. We didn't speak much as we made our way back to shore. The boat's engine hummed loudly in the quiet night, but it felt like we were trying to escape something that had no intention of letting us go. The next day, we spoke to a few other fishermen at the dock, trying to make sense of what we had experienced. Some of them listened carefully, then nodded knowingly. "Sea spirits," they said with a quiet reverence, as though they were familiar with the phenomenon. We scoffed at the idea. Sea spirits? Ridiculous. But whatever it was we had encountered, whether it was sea spirits or something more tangible, it was real. The creatures we saw that night weren't like anything I've ever seen before or since. They were not just animals. They were something other, something out of place. I don't know what they were, but I don't want to know. To this day, I have never seen anything like it again. But sometimes, when I'm out on the water at night, and the lights of the boat flicker against the waves, I wonder if those creatures are still out there, lurking in the deep, waiting for the next unwitting soul to cross their path. Whatever they were, I know one thing for sure. It was a night I'll never forget. Story 6. Haunted yacht from Gribby. Everyone wishes they had a rich uncle, but I'll bet they don't wish that. Rich Uncle's yacht was also haunted. That's something I learned firsthand when I was years old. My family wasn't well off. Dad worked construction, Mum did part-time at a grocery store, so luxury was never something my brothers and I experienced until Uncle Leonard. He's the wealthiest member of our extended family. Uncle Leonard invited us to spend certain weekends on his yacht. At first we thought it was some kind of fairy tale, a sprawling boat with polished wood decks and plush cabins, but those weekends would become seared into my memory for other reasons when he visited and first asked if Peter, Gus and I, those are my two brothers, could spend weekends on his yacht. My parents were surprised, he said. It would be educational, as if riding around on a floating mansion could teach us some life lessons. Dad was reluctant at first, but Leonard insisted he would even do the pick up and drop off. Mum eventually said it could be fun. She was excited for us, but I think she also felt we might get a glimpse into a world that could inspire us to aim higher. The first time we stepped onto that yacht, I could hardly believe such a thing existed. The railings were so glossy, and the deck was almost perfectly scrubbed. Each interior cabin looked like a room in a five-star hotel, complete with satin bedspreads, flat-screen TVs, and little vases of fresh flowers on end tables. I was awestruck and a little nervous. I almost felt guilty with so much luxury around me, not sure why or what it means, but that's just how I felt. I don't think my oldest brother Peter and my other brother Gus, who was a year younger than Peter, cared the same way I did. They went about racing around, exploring the place. Eventually I joined them. We spent that whole first day just looking over every nook and cranny. Uncle Leonard showed us the bridge where a professional captain sometimes guided the aunt, though Uncle Leonard proudly said that he was also licensed to piloted himself. He showed us the galley, the living area, which he called the saloon, and our private sleeping quarters. Our room was at the stern with 3 single beds lined against the walls and a single porthole to let in natural light. Uncle Leonard's own suite was down the corridor behind a locked door he jokingly referred to as the command center. From our room, we could hear the onboard generator and the gentle slosh of water. Everything was mesmerizing. That night the wind picked up and the boat began to sway. Nothing too dramatic, but definitely enough to make me remember that I was not used to this kind of thing. We were on our beds, lights off, couldn't sleep. I was listening to the gentle creaking of the yacht, I think. Within an hour or two I managed to go to sleep though, but when I woke up the next morning, Gus looked pale. He said he woke up in the middle of the night and heard someone whispering outside her cabin door. Said that it didn't sound like wind or waves. He said it was more like someone talking under their breath, pacing back and forth in the hallway. Neither Peter nor I heard anything though, but Gus was sure. Peter teased him and said it was just his imagination or a dream, but I believed Gus didn't think he'd be tricking us like that. Aside from that incident, our first weekend ended without any major scares. Uncle Leonard treated us to a fancy dinner at the marina, then dropped us home on Sunday evening. Over the next couple of weeks, we resumed our normal lives, school chores, and after-school activities, but we looked forward to going back eventually. Uncle Leonard did invite us back a few weeks later. I was excited, but instantly reminded about Gus's experience. We would go, and Dad reminded us to be polite, to make the most of the opportunity, but be respectful. That Friday afternoon, we once again boarded his yacht. The first few hours passed quietly. Uncle Leonard was in high spirits. We ate from fruit platters, and he let us watch whatever we wanted on the yacht's entertainment system. The weather was clear and bright too, a perfect weekend to be on the water. Unexpectedly though, that night a mild storm rolled in. We could see lightning on the horizon, though the yacht didn't rock too much. Peter and Gus were in the saloon scanning through channels for a spooky movie to watch. I was watching out of a porthole, absolutely taken by the flashes of light illuminating the dark sea. At one point, a bolt of lightning lit up the saloon so bright the reflection in the glass suddenly showed a figure standing in the corridor behind us. I saw it. My heart skipped a beat and I spun around, but no one was there. I just stared at that corridor for a long moment. There was no movement, and the only sounds were the distant thunder and the subtle hum of the yacht's engine. I felt a chill, like I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. I told Peter and Gus what happened. Gus believed me right away. Peter once again tried to brush it off. He just saw Uncle Leonard walking by, or even some sort of distorted reflection, but I don't think it was either of those things. It looked more like a shadow of a figure briefly standing there watching us. We stayed awake later than usual, dozing off in sleeping bags which we'd spread out on the saloon plush carpet. Around midnight, the overhead Lights began to flicker, which we'd kept on for ourselves. I was just beginning to drift off to sleep. But that woke me right up. The flicker lasted only a second, so when it was over I tried to go back to sleep, but a few minutes later, the lights flickered again, much more violently than last time, and it was then that I heard footsteps. They were slow, almost cautious, like someone walking but also trying not to wake other people up. There was a tap. Tap, tap. I could barely breathe. Breathe. Suddenly Gus grabbed my arm and we stared at Peter. They were both awake and they were both hearing it. Peter pulled out a flashlight and together we decided to investigate. He took the lead and we followed him down that corridor, which felt colder than the saloon, like the air conditioner had kicked into overdrive. But just right there was no sign of anybody, Uncle. Leonard's door was shut and we could hear him snoring in there. We tiptoed back to the saloon, feeling creeped out. Eventually we lay back down and went to sleep. By morning the storm had passed and Uncle Leonard seemed blissfully unaware of anything. Unusual breakfast was served with cheerful conversation and we felt almost foolish bringing up our concerns again. But when Dad picked us up that Sunday, Gus insisted on telling him. After hearing the story, Dad chalked it up to typical boat noises and electrical issues caused by the storm. But even after these explanations, I didn't believe it. I was starting to think that the Y might be haunted no matter how silly that might sound. A month went by and Uncle Leonard arranged another visit. He would be hosting a party on his yacht at the marina, and he wanted us around to meet some important guests. I wasn't sure what that meant me. We arrived on a bright morning and the day was a whirlwind of caterers, waitstaff and well-dressed strangers nibbling on hors d'oeuvres. For a time, the bustling yacht made it feel less creepy. People were laughing and clinking their champagne glasses. Late that evening, once the guests had gone, Uncle Leonard told us to get some rest. We would be sleeping in our old cabin at the stern. The moment I stepped into that cabin, a wave of dread washed right over me. The 3 beds were made up neatly, crisp white sheets and matching blankets. We could barely see out the small porthole because it was so dark out and the overhead lights seemed too bright. We settled in, agreeing that something did feel strange that night for one reason or another. An hour later, everything changed. When we were about to drift off to sleep, the lights started to dim, not flickering this time, but steadily dim, like someone twisting a dial to lower the brightness. Peter jumped out of bed to check the switch. It didn't matter. The lamps remained unnaturally low, and without warning, the cabin door slammed shut. Gus yelped, and I almost dropped the flashlight, which I kept by my bedside. Peter rushed to the door, but the knob wouldn't budge, as though it was locked from the outside, or perhaps someone was holding on to it. I could hear Peter calling out for Uncle Leonard, but he didn't get a reply. Gus and I just sat there. I was shaking. My breathing got all ragged. That was when the temperature plummeted. One moment, the cabin was warm, and the next, I swear, it felt like an ice box. It was so cold I began to chatter my teeth. When I looked down, I could see my own breath too. By the now faint light, I noticed something else: the blankets on. Our beds had been pulled partway down, though none of us had done that then. Abruptly, the overhead lights blazed back to full strength, hurting our eyes. Peter tried the door again, and it opened easily. Now it made no sense. We ran out into the corridor. The hallway was dark, but there was a single emergency light at the end, just a subtle yellow glow. There was a nasty smell in the air, rancid and metallic. We walked along the hallway. We weren't sure if we should go get Uncle Leonard or just escape to the saloon. Before we could decide, we heard a sound that made my stomach drop, a gentle lullaby, like humming sound drifting from the far end of the corridor. It was soft. You could even call it sweet, yet it carried this sorrow with it. I recall the hairs on my arms standing straight up, then saw some movement in the dark. There was a figure swaying in time with the humming. It looked pale, almost translucent, more like fog than a solid form. Peter then pointed the flashlight. For a second I saw a woman's face, eyes dark and mouth moving as she hummed. Then the shape dissolved, leaving only a sort of after-image in our eyes or minds. The humming stopped abruptly too. We stood there terrified. That was all we could take. We bolted to the saloon, nearly tripping over each other. The saloon was brightly lit and empty. The area was spotless. Again, after the party, Uncle Leonard's suite door was closed and we didn't hear any sounds from him. We huddled together real close on the couch, not saying much, Part of me wanted to pound on his door to make him wake up, beg him to take us off the yacht for a while, but I was comfortable, finally felt safer, and didn't want to move. Eventually, the adrenaline wore off, enough to get us to sleep. When we woke up, there was sunlight coming through the saloon. Windows, though, our freak-out from the night before felt distant. We knew it was real. Uncle Leonard, now awake, greeted us with a cheery smile. He asked if we liked the party. He made a few jokes about us being late sleepers and said he would let us rest, since we seemed all tuckered out. We didn't know whether he truly believed nothing was wrong or if he was aware and just ignored it. Honestly, if I had to guess, I think Uncle Leonard actually never experienced this kind of stuff. Maybe something on his boat was always there, quiet and unseen. And for some reason it didn't like us. Maybe it just didn't like kids. That Sunday when Mum and Dad arrived to pick us up, we told them everything. We cooperated with the story, so that none of us could be accused of exaggeration. Even Peter, who was the biggest skeptic among us, confirmed every detail. Gus looked like he might cry after talking about the humming woman. I remember Mum and Dad looking at each other like, what the heck? But Uncle Leonard offered practical excuses: old electrical systems or powerful air conditioning and overactive imaginations. He even said that newbie sleepers on boats often have weird dreams when they're not used to the waves. I didn't know about that. I think he was scared we wouldn't be allowed to go back to stay with him on weekends anymore if we kept getting scarred or scared. Poor Leonard. It really wasn't him. We didn't want to go back because we didn't want to see anything else like that. My brothers and I are adults now. Sometimes we do talk about what we saw. We never could figure out why the yacht was haunted. All we have are some loose theories. As for Uncle Leonard, he died a few years ago. Part of his will was to sell the yacht, and his siblings and cousins would divide up the money, and that's pretty much the end of the story. Doubt I'll ever see that yacht again, but I do miss Uncle. Story 7. Night Diving at Electric Beach by Christopher 414. I'll never forget the night I went diving at Electric Beach when I was just a kid living in Hawaii. Growing up in such a beautiful place was an adventure in itself, and I had the unique privilege of living in Pearl Harbor with my father, who was stationed at the naval base there. From an early age, my dad got me into the water. I was practically raised in it. Snorkeling, scuba diving, and swimming came as naturally as breathing. I was on the swim team, raced lasers, those sleek one-person sailboats, did wreck dives on the Mahi, and even helped collect sea creatures for the local aquarium shop. By the time I was 10 or 11, I felt like I knew the waters off Hawaii like the back of my hand. There was always something new to discover beneath the surface, and my dad was right there with me, sharing in the excitement. One weekend, my father received a call from his buddy John, who wanted to do a night dive at Electric Beach. Now, Electric Beach was a well-known spot among divers. It was a small inlet located next to a power plant on the west side of Oahu. The place got its name from the cooling pipes of the plant, which dumped warm water into the ocean, creating an ideal environment for marine life. There were two massive cooling pipe outlets, one about 300 meters offshore and another about 30 meters down. These outlets were like magnets for marine creatures, especially at night when the waters turned into a glowing, eerie landscape. After a quick discussion with the Admiral, my mom, my dad got the green light. I heard the whole conversation from my room upstairs, and when my dad came down to get ready, I was already halfway down the stairs asking if I could join them. Surprisingly, the Admiral said yes. I was thrilled. My dad had never let me dive at night before, but tonight would be different. We quickly packed our gear, wetsuits, tanks, lights, and threw everything into the old Jeep. It was a classic island dive. No fancy gear, just a simple, straightforward adventure into the dark waters of Electric Beach. The drive there felt long, even though it was only about a 20-minute trip. The sun had already set, and the night was starting to creep in, casting a shadow over the landscape. When we finally arrived, the place felt different in the darkness. The cool night air felt refreshing against my skin as we pulled the gear out and began prepping. Electric Beach at night was much more foreboding than during the day. During the day, it was a bustling spot for divers, swimmers, and tourists. But at night, it was a whole different story. The cooling pipes jutted out of the water like giant, silent sentinels. My dad and John didn't seem bothered by the surroundings, though. They were seasoned divers, and this was just another night dive for them. But as I stood there on the shore, looking at the dark, churning water, I could feel my heart racing. There was something in the air that night, something I couldn't quite explain, but it made the water feel different. We went into the water one by one, diving off the rocky shore. The current was stronger than usual, and it didn't take long for my father and John to start moving toward a section near the cooling pipes. I followed behind them, but something wasn't right. I was still on the surface with my BCD, buoyancy control device, inflated, and the water began to feel more ominous. It was getting rougher, and my father and John were already sinking deeper into the water. I followed their lead and deflated my BCD to start my descent. It was then that I made a mistake. I had no idea where I was. As I dropped, I couldn't see my father or John anymore. The water was dark, and the lights from our surface floats were too far away. I panicked. I had never been in a situation like this before. I couldn't see the bottom, and the water around me felt like it was closing in. My heart started to pound as I realized how alone I was in the vast ocean. I inflated my BCD, trying to shoot back to the surface, but everything felt wrong. The deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. I couldn't find the surface, I couldn't find the lights, I couldn't hear anything. It felt like I was drifting endlessly in an infinite, dark expanse of water. My breathing was erratic, my thoughts scrambled, I was wasting air from my tanks, and I knew I couldn't stay down much longer. I felt completely and utterly lost. I thought about all the stories I'd heard about sharks and the ancient Hawaiian shark gods that were said to rule the waters. I imagined them lurking beneath me, watching me with their glowing eyes, waiting for the moment to strike. The fear gripped me, making it harder to breathe. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but the panic only grew stronger. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a glimmer of light. At first, it was faint, just a soft glow off to my left. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so disoriented that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. But then I heard it. A car horn, honking in a familiar pattern. Honk, 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 honk. I knew that sound. It was my dad's Jeep, the old beater we'd driven there. I couldn't explain how, but I felt like that horn was my lifeline, guiding me back to safety. I pushed myself toward the light, kicking my legs with every ounce of energy I had left. I kept my focus on the glow, the honking sound ringing in my ears. When I finally broke the surface, I was overcome with relief. The lights from my dad's Jeep were shining down from the upper picnic area, and my dad had driven it up to give me a makeshift lighthouse to guide me back. I crawled out of the water, trembling and gasping for air. My dad was there, just standing at the shore, looking at me like I had just returned from the dead. I started sobbing, shaking uncontrollably. I thought I was going to die out there. It turned out I was only about 50 feet from shore the whole time, but in that moment, I felt like I was a million miles away. We sat down on the shore, the cold ocean breeze blowing through my wet hair. I realized that I had let my fear take over, and in doing so, I had lost my sense of direction. The ocean had been vast and all-encompassing, but my dad's Jeep lights had cut through the darkness like a beacon of hope. That night, I learned something about myself. The ocean, as beautiful and mesmerizing as it is, can also be merciless and disorienting, and sometimes the only thing that can save you is the familiar, a light in the darkness, guiding you home. It's a night I'll never forget, a night I thought I was going to be swallowed up by the sea, but somehow, against all odds, I made it back to shore, and in that moment I knew just how small I was in the grand, vast expanse of the ocean. Story 8. Wrinkles on the water's surface, by Anonymous. I'll start by saying I'll never get on a boat again. When I was about 10 years old, my grandparents decided to take me on a vacation to Florida. I was beyond excited. This would be my first time experiencing the ocean. Growing up near a river had given me a love for water, but the ocean was something entirely different. I'd seen it on TV, in movies, and heard people talk about it, but I had never actually been close to its vastness. The thought of the deep blue color and the salty air was something that I couldn't wait to experience for myself. The moment we arrived at the beach, I rushed down to the water. The sand was warm under my feet, and the waves crashed in front of me like they were calling me to play. I felt an overwhelming sense of awe. It was massive, way more water than I'd ever seen in my life, and the sound of the waves was hypnotic. I splashed around for what felt like hours, my feet sinking in the wet sand as I tried to jump over the waves. At some point, I noticed a boy nearby, about my age. He had tan skin and dark hair, and he seemed to be staring at me with a curious look. I smiled and waved, never one to shy away from meeting someone new. He waved back, then walked closer. I beckoned him over, hoping to make a new friend. To my delight, he seemed eager to join me, and before long, we were playing together in the surf, laughing and splashing water at each other. The day passed in a blur of fun. We built sloppy sand sculptures and ran along the shoreline, enjoying the warmth of the sun. After a while, the boy turned to me with a smile and asked if I wanted to walk down the beach with him. He said he wanted to show me something, and I, of course, was intrigued. I agreed, and we set off down the beach together. We walked for some time, the soft sand giving way to harder, cooler ground as we made our way along the water. Eventually, we came to a large inlet, a sort of lagoon where a small river fed fresh water into the salt water. The water in the lagoon had a murky, blue-green color, almost like a natural pool. The sun's light bounced off the surface, giving it an inviting sheen. It felt peaceful there, but there was also something slightly unsettling about the place. The boy's grip tightened around my hand as he pulled me toward a boat docked near the edge of the water. My curiosity was piqued even more. As we walked closer, I noticed a strange symbol carved into a large rock by the shore. The mark was intricate, almost like a rune or a design I'd never seen before. But before I could ask about it, my attention was drawn to the boat. It was small, old, and weathered, with peeling paint that looked like it had been through a lot. "Where are we going?" I asked, unable to hide the confusion in my voice. He looked back at me and smiled, his eyes gleaming with a secret I didn't yet understand. "The middle," he said simply, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Before I could say anything else, he climbed into the boat and motioned for me to follow. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the boat beside him. As we pushed off from the shore, the air grew thicker, heavier. It wasn't like the fresh breeze I had felt earlier. This air felt dense. The further we moved into the lagoon, the quieter it became. It was like the world itself had been muffled, as if the sounds of nature had been swallowed up by something unspoken. As we floated deeper into the lagoon, I couldn't help but look down at the water. I had expected to see the usual ripples from the boat moving over the surface, but something was different. The water wasn't rippling at all, it was wrinkling. The best way I can describe it is like the sheets of a bed recently disturbed. The water seemed to fold in on itself, the surface twisting in strange, unnatural patterns. I couldn't explain it, but the sight filled me with a sense of unease. I glanced back at the boy, but he was staring ahead, as if this was all perfectly normal. Suddenly the boat lurched, and the boy shook me from my thoughts. "We're here," he said with an odd finality. I leaned over the side of the boat to see what he was pointing to in the water. At first I couldn't make sense of it. There, just beneath the surface, was something dark and shifting. It wasn't a fish, nor a shark, or even a dolphin. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't put into words. It looked like thick, viscous black oil, but it moved. It undulated in the water, swirling in unnatural patterns. The shape was massive, though it was hard to tell just how big it was because it seemed to stretch and shift, constantly changing. I remember feeling a chill crawl up my spine as I stared at it, but before I could ask the boy what it was, I felt a sharp shove on my back. The boat rocked violently, and I lost my balance. Before I could catch myself, I fell into the water with a splash. Panic surged through me as I sank beneath the surface, struggling to breathe. The water didn't feel like regular ocean water. It didn't feel wet at all. Instead, it was thick, like I was sinking through some kind of gel or oil. The dark mass surrounded me, and my body seemed to lose all sensation. I couldn't move, couldn't control my limbs. It was as if something was pulling me deeper, dragging me toward the center of the dark shape. Fear flooded my mind. I kept trying to struggle, but my body refused to obey. I sank further, my thoughts growing more frantic with each passing moment, and then everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the soft sand beside the lagoon. The sun was lower in the sky, and my clothes were soaked through. I had no idea how I had gotten there, but there was one thing that was absolutely clear. I had been underwater, and I hadn't known how to swim. There was no sign of the boy, no boat, no strange rock with the symbol. Everything was gone, as if it had never been there in the first place. I was alone, soaked to the bone, and my heart was racing. The sunburn on my skin felt raw, and I was disoriented as I sat up, trying to make sense of what had happened. I spent what felt like hours staring out at the lagoon, unable to shake the feeling that something had happened to me, something I couldn't explain. I had no memory of how I had gotten to the shore, or how long I had been unconscious, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever that boy had shown me, whatever I had fallen into, it wasn't natural. I never spoke about it to anyone, not my grandparents, not my parents, not even the other kids I met while I was there. How could I? How could I explain what I had experienced? I still have no idea what happened that day or what I encountered in those strange waters, but I know I'll never forget the feeling of sinking, the unnerving wrinkles on the water's surface, and the cold, dark force that seemed to pull me down into the depths. And I'll never get on a boat again.